So I'm going to start with the first question, which is the true definition of a multisense. I think it's quite important to establish that first. And I'm going to come to Will because the FIA and the BRE did some research on this not so long ago. So Will, can you just describe to us what a multisensor is, please?
It's a very good question because lots of people say that a multisensor is a sensor with two or more separate elements, which is a very loose definition of multisensor, which isn't quite true. We have things called enhanced opticals, thermally enhanced opticals. They technically have a heat element in them as well as an optical sensor. That's not a multi-sensor, that's an enhanced optical. True definition of a multi-sensor is a detector, a sensor with multiple elements which can report multiple information back to the CIE. In my view, a multi-sensor is something that will detect a phenomenon and report back to the CIE and be able to detect more than one fire phenomenon.
And Paul, any how does your particular industry, because you're more involved on the maintenance side of multi-sensors, so how do you approach multi-sensors?
It comes down to the sensors that are actually enabled and that a fire decision is actually dependent upon. So although Will quite correctly identified which is sometimes termed a multi-criteria detector, in the wording within the standards, the fire signal is determined by heat and also smoke. So both of them still need to be tested from our point of view. Mm-hmm. So I guess ours is a bit more of a simplistic view compared to what it is from the point of view of a designer and the different capabilities of detection. But when it comes down to test and maintenance, it's a little bit clearer on that front because you've got those sensors, they're enabled, and according to standards, they should actually be tested, obviously in line with the manufacturer's guidelines.
And Terry, coming back to you, when you're designing systems and you're talking to your end user and you're explaining or you're suggesting use of a multi-sensor, are people aware of what multi-sensor means generally?
It depends. Normally end users know, but we are finding that more and more consultants and specifiers are taking on board the facilities of multi-sensors. Still not as much as we would like. We find that a lot of specifiers don't actually physically understand the full spectrum and capabilities, but it is something which is a lot more at the forefront now on design, which helps, especially with hotels, student accommodation and the like.
Can I just jump in? I think one of the things that always gets missed when we start talking about multi-sensors is the paperwork side of it, and the process of how you actually design with a multi-sensor, and the importance of Annex E in 5839 and the Table E1 form, which should flow throughout the life of the system, right down to the maintenance guy who has to test the multi-sensor. And how does he know what he needs to test if he doesn't know how it's programmed? Exactly. And it's the programming of the multi-sensor and the criteria that's been selected and the settings that it's been selected to, which is the key bit, which is the whole reason why we're using a multi-sensor, because it gives us more options. I even know companies that are just fitting multi-sensors.
Yeah.
Blanket. Not that they're using them as multi-sensors, it's where we only carry one detector on our vans, we specify one detector, we buy one detector, and it fits every scenario, we just program it.
And are they installing them? Are they installing them as heat detectors?
They are even installing them as heat detectors.
Okay.
Just because for simple, one device on the van, one spare, easy service. They know that every engineer will have 4 or 5 on the van, and there's enough to do replacements. So there is that simple advantage, because yes, they might cost a bit more than a normal heat detector, but the cost in time they felt was, well, the cost of time and the downtime for the customer. It's easier just to specify one detector, and the programming and the documentation is the key to a multi-sensor. It's not take it out the box and put it on the ceiling.
It clearly states in BS that if you do use multi-sensors, then not only their criteria needs and their environment needs to be included, but why you've used them, that has to be within the O&M manual, which should be then available to the engineer in the first place. I've not heard of companies doing what you're saying, Will, but it doesn't surprise me, to be honest.
This is something that we get reported frequently. You know, fire alarm engineers going out onto sites, they can spot that they've got a multi-sensor installed, but they haven't got a clue how it's actually configured, and there's no on-site documentation. If you go back a few years, one of the things that we started trialing, and we never got it to the market, but it was a way of using Bluetooth and RFID technology to interrogate the detector and how it was actually programmed. Never got to the market, but that was all to try to deal with that particular problem. And you know, today it still is a big problem, you know, because we just lack on-site documentation.
Going back to Terry's point, it's very often fire systems are handed over in a very poor fashion, unfortunately, and documentation's a bit generic when it's put together in O&M manuals. That's one of the banes of the industry. So when the engineer comes to work on the system, he's very often just got a generic report there that could reflect any other system anywhere else in any other building. Unfortunately, it's not tailored specifically to the system that it's meant for.
Can they refer to the panel? The panel would tell them potentially what mode. But it means going to the panel for each one, I guess.
Yes. Obviously, it would give them the category of fire and times of switching from possibly heat to smoke, or you know. But do they really have the time when they carry out their maintenance, because they're there just to test to make sure that device functions correctly? Do they really need to delve a lot deeper in there? They should.
Yeah.
But
sometimes it's time, sometimes it's skill, and sometimes they just don't have the permissions, the rights to actually go into that particular section of the panel to interrogate it. So
correct. Yeah, but very often, as I think Terry touched on it there, there's if you've got a multi-skilled type maintenance engineer, he may not have the right qualifications and knowledge level to be doing what he needs to be doing. It may be outside of his skill set, in all honesty. I mean, a true fire company, of course the engineer should be able to do that. You would imagine that would be the minimum benchmark, but it's not always the case, unfortunately. The person maintaining the system may not have that qualification or that skill set. I think training's key. People maintaining fire systems need to be trained at the right level to understand what they're maintaining.
I totally agree with that 100%.
yeah, me too.
But all the training in the world isn't going to, if you turn up on site, you don't know how something's been programmed, it's not going to help you. You do need something, some sort of feedback mechanism from the device itself, because it could be 9 meters on the ceiling, right?
Depending on the panel, Paul, that information is freely achievable to download or to understand, but the engineer may not be qualified or confident to go and pull the information out and understand it at the right criteria, the right level.
the other thing that's on the horizon, which is out of the back of the Hackett report, is this whole thing to do with the golden thread and the idea that we're going to move away from paper-based systems to digital-based systems. So there's a possibility there that things might actually tighten up and improve. You know, that would be really good to have that, you know, all that documentation in electronic format that's easy accessible. So that's something to look forward to in the future, I guess.
Yeah, back in my servicing days, we used to have paper job sheets, and on there was always a space for notes. And for sites like this, maybe we have notes to say which devices were set as which particular for which particular criteria. I don't know whether maybe, obviously in the electronic age now, that may be something that could be implemented, as was mentioned just now, a virtual resource that would actually give the engineers that information.
Well, I can say that we use a couple of systems for our engineers. One of them is JobWatch, which links the engineer directly to the service file. So not only will they be able to, via their iPads, see what's happened over the last few service visits, but and call outs, but they then have access as well to the O&M manuals and the layout drawings, etc., etc. But that's only on projects that we've been involved with right from the beginning. To collect that information on new services that we've picked up from other people is, and always has been, a bit of an issue, I'm afraid.
One of the things I've picked up on, which is quite interesting, on some of the training sessions we've been running, we've had a big increase in interest from risk assessors, understanding what it is to have a properly maintained system. And this is covering a number of aspects, everything from the potential from dirt and contamination because of high footfalls, through to the types of detection there, where within the risk assessment, they're actually be given guidance, additional guidance for the maintenance engineer to actually to follow. And I think this is a real positive thing that I've actually come across, just recently. And maybe there could be provision for, bolstering that and pushing that a little bit further, I think.
Even from my side, I look after the risk assessment section of the FIA, and I've had our risk assessment members talk to me about multi-sensors, because they're doing a risk assessment on a premises that has multi-sensors and they don't know how they're programmed.
Exactly.
So how can they begin to assess?
How can they assess the risk?
Plenty of room for tightening up here, I think, and with the 5839 up for review at the moment, maybe there's some possibilities to be a bit more prescriptive in this area, maybe to point out towards risk assessors to question some of these things a bit more, because they are in that ideal situation to have an overview, so there's room for improvement. But as we've all pointed out here, there's a bit of a situation at the moment where confusion rules, really.